Good evening, friends. Greetings from ECC and CSI. This is the 16th lecture we have on wider contextualized biblical hermeneutics. This evening, the session will be moderated by Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti. He's a person behind for this course. If we compare this course with a vehicle, I would say that Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti is the engine that take us along. So he's a professor of New Testament at the Union Biblical Seminary, Pune. So I welcome him and request him to take over for the session to moderate this chair and formally welcome our speaker for this evening. Over to you, sir.
So thank you, Minlin and ECC and CSI for this opportunity.
Friends, I would like to introduce to you the speaker for this evening, Reverend Dr. Subhro Sekhar Sircar. He's a professor of New Testament and Faculty of Theology at Serampur College, West Bengal. He is the head of the Department of Postgraduate Studies, Department of New Testament, and he authored a book called Paul's Theology of Mission to the Nation in Romans, and he wrote several articles and published it in national and international journals. So we are happy to have him this evening, and we are looking forward to listen to your exciting lecture from on Paul's message in the Prison Epistles. We now called the speaker for this evening, Dr. Subhro Sekhar. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and very glad to see you all, those who have joined in this virtual learning through Zoom conference. And there will be some issues, probably network issues, and I hope that we will be able to manage well, and I thank you all for your presence in this very important class for biblical interpretation. And I see that I have very respected, some people are here, like my professor Dr. Mani Chako, I have seen, who is the current Bible Society General Secretary. He is there. And then I see the Reverend Dr. P.C. Gain is there. And I do not know whether anybody I know. And so thank you all again for your presence in this class. And I know that without you, we won't be able to do this. And so, and there are some, I think, a lot of interest among you, and my lecture will be I'll try to be very simple, as many of you are coming from the lay background in the church, and so you have interest to learn the scripture. And today our topic is Paul's message in the prison letters, prison epistles. And I think as a biblical teacher, I always start with the word of prayer, and so I will have a short word of prayer, and then we begin in the class. Okay. Gracious God, we thank you for this wonderful time that you have given to us, as we have joined from different parts of the country and outside. We are grateful to you for this opportunity that we never had, this very unprecedented situation, and that has given us an opportunity to meet together in this manner. Even though we are not physically present, we do not have to travel. We can sit in the comfort of our home and listen and learn, and which is I suppose there's a great opportunity for all of us. As you have brought us together and we learn this subject, we ask your blessing upon it, grant us your wisdom and knowledge, and help that this session will be very meaningful to all of us, and our internet and whatever the media that we are using, that will function well, the network, and also we ask your help and guidance that all of us will be able to hear properly. We submit this class into your mighty hand. In Jesus' name we offer this prayer. Amen. Well, I hope that you're able to hear me clearly. If there is any kind of disturbances, of course from my side it may be also sometime internet, but if the voice are not clear, I mean, you can stop and so that we can listen. Now our subject is Paul's message in the prison letters. After hearing the word prison, probably I do not know what is in your mind thinking about this. There may be definitely some kind of adversity, some hardships, there may be persecution, many words probably that will come to our mind. And so, in fact, I would like to tell you that during this adversity or imprisonment, now sometime we see that the best in fact come out from this kind of experiences, and especially if we look at the past centuries, and then we'll find, like, to name few of them at least, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and then Alexander Solzhenitsyn in Russia, or Martin Luther King Jr. in USA, all were imprisoned, and they have generated very powerful writing when they wrote from their imprisonment. And the ideas that they have received, it's a tremendous, and very with careful attention, that they were able to write those writings in this very unprecedented situation. And in the New Testament, it is very, I mean, this is all more probably true for the Apostle Paul, who endured such an hardships and imprisonment that are recorded in his epistles. And now he was looking for many years to come to Rome and preach the gospel, and then but then his desire was fulfilled, but not as a free man, but as a prisoner. And so he was there in prison in Rome, and finally he arrived there, and then he wrote some of the epistles. Of course, there is a dispute that from which imprisonment Paul wrote these epistles, and so, but we will be looking into some of these areas as we try to understand the message of the prison epistles. Before I go into, I would like to make some very preliminary remarks about these prison epistles, where in the Pauline corpus there are 13 epistles, right? So there are 13 epistles, and so why do these prison epistles stand? So I would like to put them in a context, in a broader context, so that we will be able to understand these epistles well. You know, as among the extent of the Pauline corpus, the letters, namely Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. These are the known as prison letters, and also sometimes it is called captivity letters. And so, of the 13 epistles, Paul, in fact, addressed to some very specific congregation, specific church, or we call congregation. So they are known as the congregational letters, and there are 9 of them. And there are also few individual letters, and there are 4 of them. And so Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians are congregational letters, and Philippian is a personal letter. And so this is one of the way that we can look into it, the status of the prison epistles. Then another way, this among the 13 letters, there are also some broad categories, and they are according to their different theological emphasis, and it is not in the actually strict sense, but there are overlapping of these the ideas that we find also in other epistles. But however, to put them in this category, there is first of all soteriological letters, which is actually called salvation letter or theology of salvation. There are 4 of them are categorized in this: Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Galatians. Then Christological letters, and that we have 3 letters under this category on Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians, that which we will be studying. So Christological letters, and then we have 2 eschatological letters, 1st Thessalonians and 2nd Thessalonians, and then the last one is the ecclesiological letters, or the church, concerning the church, 1st Timothy, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, and also as well as Philemon, would put them into this category. And then there are also third way to look into this Pauline corpus, Pauline epistles. There are among the 13 letters, there are at different times, at different contexts or situations that they were written. And so I could put them according to chronology and the context. According to the chronology and context. So the first group probably would be the early letters. They are 1st Thessalonians, 2nd Thessalonians, and Galatians, 3 letters. Sometime, of course, some people think the Galatians was the first letter that was written, and there are other scholars who say put the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians as the first letters, and so that's how they look into the early letters. Then we have the major letters, or the longest letters we call them, because they were written after that, and they are actually Romans and 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Though each of them have the 1st Corinthians and Romans has 16 chapters, and the 13 chapters that 2nd Corinthians that we have. And then we have the prison letters, that what we are going to study. That is the context of the situation that we can categorize, that Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. And that is correct. Then the final and the pastoral letters, pastoral situation or the final letters, 1st Timothy, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. Now, at this point, I have to make one comment that even these pastoral letters like 2nd Timothy and all, they were written from the prison, but they were not put into this prison category because those letters emphasize some other things, especially the church and all these things. That is why they are not put it into this category. Okay, and then lastly, which is actually it's a very from the controversial point, and that is the according to the authorship. According to authorship, and there are among the 13 letters that attributed, some are genuine letters and others are not. So according to authorship, among the scholars that they debated, and so we have the first category as the undisputed or authentic letters, and there are 7 of them: Romans, 1st Corinthians, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, and Philippians, and Philemon. So these are it's known as the almost all the scholars they accept as the very authentic letters of Paul. And the second one is the disputed letters, and where we'll be studying about those disputed letters, that is particularly this prison epistles, and that is the Ephesians and Colossians, and particularly these 2. And then there are false letters. They fall into the last category. In fact, the 1st Timothy, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. However, said all these things, and I strongly believe that all the 13 letters were written by Paul, and so, but we do not have time to discuss all these things at this stage. But this is where I would like to put our prison letters. So if we have this kind of knowledge that where among the Pauline 13 letters, that where these prison letters fall. So, there are congregational letters, personal letters, as well as the theologically Christological letters. Then the prison situation, prison context they were written, and then we have the according to the authorship. So that is the Deutero-Pauline or Deutero-Pauline letter or disputed letters. So, as we have seen this, prison letters. Now, let us go into that Paul's imprisonment. Paul's imprisonment. That means from there only we can get the time and the place of writing. And the question much discussed among the scholars in the recent times first is that, oh, let me share that. I forgot to share the okay. Okay, here actually I put it there, but I forgot to, you did not tell me about it to start this, the PowerPoint presentation. So here what I have said, is all these are written here, and so now we are coming to this point that the evidence of Paul's imprisonment in the prison epistles. So why are they called prison epistles? And that is the question has been debated, and here we have that. The internal evidence shows that they were written while the Apostle Paul was held in prison. All right. And the letter to the Philippians mentions at least 3 clear passages of such imprisonment of the author, and there are these references are there. Then the letter to Philemon contains 4 distinct allusions where Paul mentions about this, and these are the verses, or these are the phrases that he mentions in this letter. And then the letter to the Colossians, there are 2 times Paul refers to the writer's imprisonment in 4:3 and 4:18. Okay, and then the last one is the letter to the Ephesians. We find 3 unmistakable allusions to the author's imprisonment, and these are the references that we find. So these are the evidences, internal evidences in the Paul's imprisonment. That is why we call them as the prison epistles or prison letters. And then we will look into the Paul's imprisonment and the time and place of writing. Now, there are the question much discussed in the recent time is that were all 4 letters composed in the same imprisonment? That is the question. And if so, if it is so, in which imprisonment? For we know that Paul was imprisoned more than once. Paul also boasts of having been in prison more frequently than the apostles. And so, there are a number of occasions that Paul was imprisoned. Luke provides more details in the Acts of the apostles. Paul spent a night in prison in Philippi, that recorded in Acts 16, and then he stood trial before Gallio at Corinth. So there also we find Luke also tells us 2 or 3 other imprisonments which are longer duration, like one at Caesarea, chapter 24 of Acts, and then another is the Rome, that is Acts 28. And then lastly, Paul also underwent a second imprisonment in Rome. So from there that we have the 3 places of imprisonment, and that is that is proposed by the scholars, and that we are going to look into it very briefly, so that will help us to understand these prison letters. First of all is the Rome. Okay, and traditionally all 4 letters have been viewed as coming from Paul's Roman imprisonment, and this is particularly described at the end of the book. And so if this tradition is correct, then these letters must be dated or written to approximately AD 60 to 62. During this time it was written, and all 4 contain references to Paul in prison as mentioned above. Traditionally also Philemon, Colossians and Ephesians have been considered to come from one period of Paul's imprisonment, and Philippians from another. So that is the traditional belief. That is the first one. Then the second one is the Caesarea. Now, since the scripture never specifies the location of time of the imprisonments that we find in the 4 letters, so this resulted in the other proposal that has come from the different scholars and at a different time and place. And so here is one, the Caesarea from Acts 23 that we find, and also 24, that it's known that Paul spent 2 years in prison at Caesarea on the Palestinian coast, that is during this time. So if this theory we accept, then Paul must have written all those prison epistles during this time. Now, according to Robinson, he suggests that Paul wrote 1 or more prison letters from this place. So that is his suggestion. But Caesarea is over 450 miles from Ephesus, which would have been a quite difficult for navigating for back and forth. And so this is one thing. And then besides, Philemon, the 22 that we find, verse 22, Paul remains hopeful that he is released from prison in the near future. And so a hope not evident in Paul's attitude or situation described in Acts 23 to 24. Therefore, many scholars discard this place as the place of writing, or Paul's place of imprisonment, for where he wrote this epistle. Then the third place is the Ephesus. And this is in fact an old theory, which is even in the 19th century it came that suggested. And so Ephesus was the suggested that Paul's imprisonment where he wrote these epistles. And so some scholars also even subscribe to it, and they say that 4 letters were composed during the imprisonment at Ephesus. So then if it is that, then his letters will be written much early, not in the 60s or the beginning of 60s. So this is how that we can conjecture. Now this would have made Paul's correspondence with Ephesus and Colossians comparatively easy, because they're situated in the close vicinity, maybe about like 100 miles, and so they can navigate easily. Then Tychicus would only have to travel, that is the easy travel across, because all these letters were sent by, all the 3 letters were sent through Tychicus. All right, so that is why I'm mentioning Tychicus. We will have talk about him little later. Travel across town to deliver the one letter and less than 100 miles with the other. So this proposal would explain how Onesimus, Philemon's runaway slave, could have reached Paul without any difficulty, because they are close by. But there is objection to this. So one objection is that one wonders if a runaway slave would have stayed so close to his home, since there is no any explicit reference to an Ephesian imprisonment in the New Testament. So, and events in Acts do not warrant any such situation. It is hard to accept Ephesus as the place of Paul's imprisonments. So then what we conclude, that we can say that the dominant early church tradition also from the church fathers, and even as early as even 95, AD 95, there was a suggestion that these letters were written from Rome. They are mentioned as prison letters, and then later on in the 2nd century, like 110 and followed by 140 and all in the Muratorian canon, Marcionite and all these, Jerome and John Chrysostom, Theodoret supports Rome. So is the most likely site for Paul's imprisonment. Modern scholars who support an Ephesian imprisonment for one particular prison letter have most often chosen Philippians rather than any of the other 3. So at least Philemon, Colossians and Ephesians seem most likely originated from Rome and during 61 and 62. Only some scholars think that Philippians may be coming from Ephesian. All right. However, there is a dominant view is that all the 4 epistles were written from Rome. All right, so when Paul was imprisoned about 2 years in that place. So with this understanding that the Paul's imprisonment and the writing and the date that we could figure out, and so although there are some doubts and all, but we do not want to go into the debate all this, but we just think it as the since the dominant view is the Rome, so therefore we view that those epistles were written from Rome. But said whenever the scholars discuss in the commentaries and all, most of the time they discuss Philemon, Colossians and Ephesians together, and we find a lot of this such kind of writings. And Philippians is discussed separately. So I put it separately because Philippians has a different tone. All right, and I've given here some of the information that Philippians, in fact, the church was founded in the second missionary journey when Paul was and that is recorded in Acts 16, and where he was preaching. Then he was with his helper Silas. He is also known as Silvanus, and Paul most of the time says Silvanus, and otherwise his name is Silas from Jerusalem. And both were imprisoned at Philippi. And there we know the situation that how the jailer, and earlier because of the preaching Lydia, one of the very wealthiest women, Lydia, who was converted, and then later on the jailer, because of the miraculous act of the release from the prison, and so jailer also became a Christian, and so that's how the founding of the Philippian church that we see there. But here Paul has a different tone in this epistle. Paul seemed too confident that he would be released from prison and would visit them later, and so this is and therefore Paul's influence to have reached their imperial soldiers, then Praetorian Guard, and a number of other things that is related to the Caesar, they are mentioned there. Therefore, we also, most of the scholars conjecture that Philippians also written from Rome while Paul was imprisoned there. Therefore, that we can say that it also came maybe the early part of the 60s, maybe little later after Philemon, Colossians and Ephesians, most probably. Okay, now a little bit of the relationship with the other letters of Paul, or particularly with the prison epistles. Now here I have given a kind of like a graph, and where we see the character relation between the epistles. Okay, and in that we find that Philemon and Colossians have all these individuals, and they are sending the greetings when Paul mentions them. So then what would be the conclusion? That these two letters were written together or sent together also. And then if we look at the Colossians and Ephesians, Tychicus is mentioned at the end, that who was the letter carrier. He was the letter carrier of Colossians and Ephesians, along with Onesimus, who also carried the letter of Philemon. And therefore, so there is an intrinsic relationship between these three letters, Philemon, Colossians and Ephesians. So from this we can conjecture, therefore these three letters came at the same time. They were written maybe little later after that. All right, and Philippians I put it separate because we do not find such connections with them. But it doesn't mean that there is no any relationship. But this is how the character relations that we can establish in these three letters that you can think of. Then when we come to again the close relationship between Philemon and Colossians, there is the same origin, same people give greetings, same closing. If you look at this, if you read this to the letters closing, and then you will find the same closing. And then Tychicus is mentioned. Tychicus delivered the letter of Colossians, traveled with Onesimus. And if Philemon is genuine letter, even the liberal scholars, they also think, then definitely Colossians will not be a disputed letter. It is also a genuine, because there is a same person who carried the letter. All right. So that means we can also group them in the genuine letters of Paul. And then, of course, as I have shown you earlier, that Colossians and Ephesians, they were also carried by the same person, the same letter carrier. And therefore, if that is so, then Ephesians also must be put under the genuine letters, not letter of Paul, not in the disputed letter, such that as we have already seen, and that scholars conjecture. Now, when we come to Colossians and Ephesians, then we find that historical relationship is there between these two letters very much. Epaphras, he was during Paul's Ephesian ministry, he was converted. But then this is the church that Colossians, that which Paul did not found, along with Romans also he did not found. And so Epaphras founded these letters, and not only this church, but he also founded the church, three churches, Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae. So we find this record in Colossians. And so during Paul's imprisonment in Rome, and so Epaphras asked some advice that how to help these churches, because he was finding difficult to combat that as there the Christianity, Judaism, and Greek thought was merging, and there were heretical teachings that were that creeping into the church, and therefore Epaphras was asking help, and that's the reason for why this letter to the Colossians was written. Okay, and beside this historical link, then there is also literary relationship. And the literary relationship between these two letters, we find heretical teaching there. And Paul wrote a very tough letter to the Colossians and directed them against the false teachers. And the central theme was the cosmic lordship of Jesus. And so then after writing this letter, then Paul wrote the Ephesians. So that means to write the Ephesians, that Colossians prepared the ground, and that is why we find a lot of similarities. We will find there are a lot of similarities, and that is the relationship between Colossians and Ephesians, though some scholars take it as a negative point at that point, but then we see that there is a lot of relationship is there between these two letters, and we find that more relationship there, that there is a both have basic structure, and in fact in the Greek there are 29 consecutive words in Ephesians 6:21 to 22 and with Colossians 4:7-9, only that there is similar word, exactly same, except Colossians has two different words or phrase. All right, and then both have exact and short phrases, exact phrases and sentences, similar phrases and sentences. And so I'm not going to tell all these things, just I have in my notes. And then theologically synonymous concepts are there, and terms and phrases used both Colossians and Ephesians, which are not found in any other Pauline letters, only these two letters. And therefore we find this relationship, literary relationship between these two letters. And as we summarize this relationship, that we find over 1/3 of the words in Colossians are also in Ephesians. So it has been estimated that 75 of the 155 verses are found in Ephesians. They have a parallel between these two, and both claims Paul's authorship while in prison. Both letters were delivered by Paul's friend Tychicus. Both letters were sent to same area, Asia Minor, and both letters deal with the same Christological topic, and both letters emphasize Christ, the head of the church, and both letters encourage Christian living. All right, so this is how that we can look at it, the relationship between these two. Then I would like to give you some distinctive features of these prison epistles. And to begin with, that Philemon is a very distinctive letter, very short letter with just 335 words in the Greek, and very personal. This is very personal, and coming from, and it's a very genuine letter already you have mentioned. And so it was addressed to Philemon. He was a wealthy Gentile Christian and lived in Colossae, and then later on because of Paul's ministry, he became a believer. And the main feature, the distinctive feature in this epistle is that about Onesimus, Philemon's runaway slave. And probably he did something wrong to his master, and then he landed in Rome, and then he was imprisoned there, and there Paul met him, and then he was converted there. And then Paul now requesting Philemon to take him back, receive him, forgive him, and so acknowledge Onesimus' new status as a fellow believer, so that he will not look at as a slave anymore, but as a brother, and so that also he can, if it is his will, that he can also release him, so that he can minister with Paul. So this is some distinctive features that we find in Philemon. Then when we come to Colossians, we find that church was always local in Colossians, unlike Ephesians. And heresy was prominent feature in Colossians, we find there. And then the other thing is that second coming is immediate in Colossians, but delayed in Ephesians. And there are several characteristically Pauline terms are differently used. For example, mystery. In Colossians, the mystery is Christ, but in Ephesians, which is hidden but now revealed, and that is the plan for the unity of the Gentiles and Jews. So that is how differently used, so distinctive features. And then when we come to Ephesians, then we find that there are no personal greetings in the letter, as like we find most of the other Pauline letters. And so Paul, though Paul had many more friends in Ephesians, but we do not find. But because one of the reason could be that was originally a circular letter, so therefore he did not mention any particular person. And then Ephesians has a very strong ecclesiological focus that we find in the Paul's teaching in this letter conceptualizes many churches as a collective whole. So the term ecclesia is never used in a local sense, in the local church, but in the universal sense. And then the third one, that Ephesians has several Old Testament allusions, unlike Colossians. Hardly we find any Old Testament text in Colossians, but Ephesians is full of that where Paul alluded a lot of Old Testament text in order to support his point. And then the last one is the Philippians. This highly personal letter has always been attributed to Paul. Though it is a congregational letter, but it is a personal. The first person singular pronoun I, me and my appears 51 times. And therefore, it alone argues that why it is highly the personal letter. And then another distinctive feature that we find in Philippians, that when Paul addressed them, he does not do so as Paul the Apostle, like other epistles. Right. So like other Pauline epistles, and also here we find only that he mentioned as a servant of Christ Jesus. That is the phrase. But normally, in all other letters, Paul always mentions the Paul the Apostle. But this is the only letter that where he does not mention. Probably, they were very much aware of Paul's authority, and therefore they do not need any special kind of to prove his or give the evidence of his apostleship. And then the third, the distinctive feature in this epistle is that Paul is imprisoned, and yet uses the term joy, noun and verb, 16 times. 16 times. And this makes the overall theme of Philippians is involve joy in the midst of suffering. Joy in the midst of suffering. Probably when we are in the COVID-19 time, and then where many people are suffering and going through difficult times, probably this letter, when we read, probably that will give some kind of relief, in life. So because Paul being imprisoned, suffering so much, and then, but he talks about so much of joy in this epistle. And then there is one more distinctive feature is that of the 104 verses, Jesus' name or title occurs 51 times. So it is obvious that why Christ is central in Paul's heart, mind and theology in this epistle. All right, and of course, he talks about also the supremacy of Christ, Christ's humility. Even in Colossians also same thing we find. All right. Now these three letters have a very distinctive feature that is common to them. That one of these is that the Christological hymns, and all the three epistles has a Christological hymns, And that makes, of course, these three letters, these prison letters, as very distinctive that we find. And besides the church he addressed to, he also mentions when he was addressing overseers, or sometime with some different versions called bishops, and deacons, occur only Paul's letter, only here in Paul's letter without any elaboration. There are no any other Paul's letters are addressed to bishops and deacons. This is the only letter that he is addressing to overseers along with the church, overseers and deacons. And so, but then he did not give any elaboration that who are the bishops, who are the deacons, what is their function, nothing is explained there, even in the letter also. But however, the structure probably is just maybe emerged, and so probably he might have used it, all right. And that could be one of the reasons sometimes, they discard Philippians as written by Paul, because those terms are coming in only in the 2nd century, not in the 1st century. All right. So anyhow, so here is the very short way that we will talk about the message. First of all, the Philemon. Now I have given a little bit of the background of Philemon. It is which is talking about the runaway slave Onesimus, and so therefore, though one may ask question that why Paul did not address this issue, even though he was writing to Philemon and addressing concerning the central character, the Onesimus, about Onesimus, that he did not, why he did not discuss about so much or discard this view and all this. But however, during the 1st century context, that we cannot expect so much of these things, because that was a normal practice. But then what is the main concern of the apostolic Christianity during those times is the inward spiritual transformation that would reconcile human beings to God. Therefore, if one have this personal relationship with Christ, that will give them complete change of heart, and that will change their status as well. All right. And so, in a way that by focusing on equality in Christ, irrespective of social and economic status, Paul certainly planted the seeds for the more explicit abolition movements in latter centuries. So that is why we can appreciate Paul from this. Though some people, they heavily criticize, Paul, but then we can appreciate this. Actually, he planted the seed, if you just look at it, and instigated primarily by people with Christian conviction. And that is why the later period, the people took over, and so that is the message that we can think of. And then there's another that we said that it shows that how Paul used his apostolic authority and pastoral encouragement. So many of us who are in the pastoral ministry, that how do we do our ministry? And so here Paul is an example for us, and therefore says that encouragement of the slavery in the ancient world. Paul shows how conversion to the Christian faith can break down social, racial, and economic barriers. So it is in the acceptance of Christ and giving full authority to recognize Christ that can bring them together, irrespective of their social distinction or racial distinction. It shows how Christianity made brothers and sisters out of slaves and slave owners, rich and poor. So this truth would in time radically change in the Roman Empire, we know that. So this is the kind of message that we can think of from Paul's prison letters, and it is very relevant also as well in our time. Now when we think of the other Colossians, and here some of those that briefly, that which I will like to explain to you, that some people in Colossians were challenging the supremacy and all sufficiency of the Lord Jesus Christ, and that is the heretical teaching entered there, and therefore they were not recognizing the supremacy of Christ, and Paul was challenging this, and that is the main message that he is combating in the Colossians. And so there is a beautiful hymn that we find there, 1:15-20. Paul emphasizes the pre-existence of Christ and his participation in the creation of the world. And so Jesus is presented as the Son of God, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And so many people have, some people have written article on this from the ecological point of view. So the God who is the creator, Jesus who is the creator, that who is the firstborn of our creation, that we need to have the concern for our creation. We cannot just simply discard them. And so through his death, that he started this reconciliation of the whole and the restoration of the whole humankind and the universe and the creation. So that is a very beautifully, those messages are clearly shared here, narrated, and therefore we find their relevance also in our context. Now Paul writes about Christ's ultimate victory of his and of his death on the cross and resurrection as proof of what loving God is willing to do, deal with our sins, and demolishes the erroneous teaching that had crept into the Colossian church. Right. And also in the Colossian church, people are insisting on like Sabbath, food laws, and the religious rules and so on and so forth, and that's why they were dividing too much and a lot wrong teachings were there. And Paul was addressing and combating all those issues and when he was writing to the Colossians. And therefore in our time, that how we are going to combat those kind of philosophies and those kind of practices that are creeping into our churches even in our time. And therefore Colossians will be a much helpful that as we study this epistle. Now, when we come to Ephesians, I've just put it very briefly there. The gospel of the sovereign God who has a plan to save humanity that is fragmented by religion, ethnicity, gender, wealth, and ideology has tremendous relevance for us today, of course, it's at Ephesians. And so, because there was a main concern was that there are that mystery that Paul was sharing in Ephesians, that the unity of the Gentile and the Jews. All right. So they were also that fragmented by those ethnicity, race, and all these things. And so Paul was addressing it, and therefore this letter also very relevant for us there. And today our churches currently reflects distorted image of Christ and Christianity also. And the vision of united intercultural society, even entity led by God's ideal model example are very essence of Jesus's teaching as a Son of God. And so that challenges our churches today, that these kind of realities that we are facing today that can help us to address those issues and from the Ephesian letters point of view. And then the last one that we talk about is Philippians. And the chief theme of Philippians is encouragement. All right, chief theme. And Paul wants to encourage the Philippians to live out their lives as citizens of a heavenly colony, because that is where we come across the word citizenship. And then we find here the way of life that Paul encourages was manifested uniquely in Jesus Christ. So it was evident in the lives of Paul that we find, lives of Paul, Timothy, and Epaphras. So that is the main theme that he discusses. And there are also some key themes that in the Philippians that he discusses. Christians need to keep making progress in their lives. A proper spiritual outlook is critical for progress in the faith. Christ is the supreme example of loving and faithful service to God. And mature Christian can also serve as role models in this regard. Suffering will come, but through faith it can be met with joy. Prayer is crucial for maintaining a joyful Christian life. And these are very important issues that we can think of in our church, for our churches today. The gospel is not individualistic. Christians are to share in rich fellowship with one another and to be united together in service to promote the gospel. And also then Jesus is fully God and fully man. Because of his suffering on the cross, he is now exalted as Lord and Christ. And therefore we can fully trust in him. He is the victorious one. And therefore we can accept his salvation and we can join with the new community that he has built through his life and through his sacrifice. And so here are some more the relevance of these messages that from Philippians that I have recorded. That Philippian church is a very small minority community, and they were always constantly under pressure, like for our country, India. We are a minority group here. There is a constant pressure. There will be constant pressure and there are persecution, things like that going on. And therefore, Paul approached such problems by reminding the believers that they are very basis of their faith is the incarnation of Jesus. And so he talks about that is why there's no any place of disunity, with humility that we need to, and obedience to Jesus Christ, that we need to approach this issue in our life. And God will help us. And during particularly Paul offers himself as an example of how to respond persecution and conflict. He explains that commitment to Jesus Christ and the spread of the gospel are far more important to him than human sources or prestige. He also reminds them of the example of Timothy of Epaphroditus, the latter man whom the Philippians knew well. And both these men were selfless servants of the gospel and the church. And if you read them about them, these two personalities, that how they are selflessly serving the church. And today we need such men and women of God who are serving the church, the selflessness and humility, with humility serving the congregation. And then my concluding remarks, some of it that which I would like to mention. So, and also the summary. So it is believed that 4 of his extant letters came during this imprisonment, namely Philemon, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philippians. Each names Paul as its author in the very opening lines. Each epistle makes mention of his author being a prisoner or in chains. The prison epistles are rich in courageous reflection. Their tone also teaches by examples of the same selfless confidence in God that characterizes Jesus' own life, making Paul as a true disciple of his master, that we can emulate him. The prison letters challenges ordinary church members and church leaders not to conform to the values and customs of society at large. We should not be afraid to be different by being as selfless as in our pattern of thinking and in our everyday lives, as we find the model and the example in these prison epistles. The prison letters of Paul, Christ is victorious, he is unique, so receive his salvation and live differently as new community of believers. And that's what the prison letters the challenges us, that we live differently, live out the gospel life, and live out the life that Christ has shown us as an example, so that we can, as a Christian believer, that we can tackle this present context, the present situation, in a powerful way and a meaningful way. Thank you all, and thank you for listening. And this is the end of my lecture. And so, it's a very nutshell. I know that I cannot do the justice for all the 4 letters. It takes a lot of time. But in a nutshell, that we can think of that how these prison letters, their messages, and what is there has been Paul has written from his imprisonment, how it can encourage us as a believer, as a church people, as a community of believers people, that how it can encourage us. And that is how that I wanted to present it to you. And I hope that if you have any question next, then we can discuss. We have still some time since we started late, and so I went very fast. I do not know how much you are able to follow it, but I was looking at the time, since I have been told strictly that I need to at the most by 50 minutes I should finish. And therefore I hope that I have tried it. I tried my level best to finish within these 50 minutes. Thank you all. Now over to the moderator.
So friends, I hope that you are able to hear me. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So at the
We can hear you.
Right at the beginning, I was not able to connect with you.
Yes,
there
we
were
can hear
some connection problems, so I was not able to introduce Reverend Dr. Subhro Sekhar Sircar. Reverend Dr. Subhro Sekhar Sircar is Professor of New Testament, Faculty of Theology at Serampore College, Hooghly, West Bengal. So my position as a lecturer in Serampore College was from 2001 till 2004, about 4 years. During that time, Dr. Sircar was my senior colleague, and he served Serampore College as a vice principal, and currently he is the head of the Department of Postgraduate Studies, Department of New Testament at NIBJITS. NIBJITS is a consortium of okay, postgraduate and a doctoral program. Okay, it is a consortium of Sarabur College and Bishop's College and other colleges. It is called North India Institute of Postgraduate Theological Studies. And Dr. Sircar published his dissertation that is entitled Paul's Theology of Mission to the Nations in Romans, and many edited articles and articles in different journals. In that way, he is a well-known figure. And when we come to the lecture that he was making, the greatness of God was emphasized in the Pauline epistle, Prison Epistles, the exalted Christ and the salvation, its the salvific aspects in the Pauline epistles, the status of the believers, the unity of the Jews and the Gentiles, and the struggle with the powers and the principalities and the ethical obligations of the believers, how Paul is presenting himself as an apostle to the Gentiles, and how he is addressing the ecclesiastical, the theological, Christological, eschatological, and various other aspects. In a nutshell, Dr. Sircar was informing us. Now it is time for us to raise our questions and concerns to Dr. Sircar. This is a unique opportunity for us to raise our questions. So Minlun, please help me to find out people, those who are raising questions.
Oh, sure.
Yes. So you can come up. I think that one person who was raising question, I have seen that Stephen Jnanavaraj was raising some concern. May you ask that question, Brother Stephen Jnanavaraj?
Letters were lost. So, what kind of an impact would the lost letters have had?
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, sure, sir. Hold on. Yeah, I think you can hear me now.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, we understand that some of Paul's letters were lost. So, what kind of an impact would those lost letters have had on the, overall Pauline, for us to get a better understanding or a more comprehensive understanding of Paul's messages through his letters?
Okay, you want me to speak now?
Yes, yes. You can.
Okay. Actually, those lost letters that we find in the letter to the Corinthians, and probably the professor who discussed about Corinthian correspondence, I do not know whether he discussed about that there. At that point, there are two letters perhaps that probably that Paul wrote, which their mention we find in Corinthian correspondence, Corinthian letters, and but since they do not survive, we do not know what were the contents of those letters. And so I don't think that I am in a position to tell that what impact those lost letters, which those letters did not survive, that it could have made. I don't know that whether I can conjecture anything from the Corinthian correspondence. And Corinthian, of course, church is a very problematic church. As you know, there are a lot of problems, there are a lot of issues, and whether Paul was addressing some of those issues, repeating there in those epistles, I do not know, because he elaborately explains there in the First Corinthians, and then followed by his second letter that he shared, and therefore those lost letters, how if would have survived, that how would have impacted the Christian community today, I don't think that I am in a position to tell it. All right. So, and I do not know if any other scholars present here. I mean, I see Dr. Gain is here, even Dr. Johnson himself, and any other person can, if they can answer this question, that how if they would have survived, what impact those letters would have made.
Dr. Nanavaram?
Yes, thank you. It's a great joy to hear from you, Dr. Subhro Sekhar. You said that it is not that easy to. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, sure.
Yeah. You said that it is not easy to talk about 4 epistles on a single day. But beware, I'm going to talk about 8 epistles on a single day on the 22nd of October. I'm wondering what I'm going to do on the 22nd of October. Please wait for that. It's good to see my friend, Dr. Pratap Gain, and my guru, Dr. M.J. Joseph. It's so good to see you, Aya. I narrowly missed you to do my PhD with you. It's a great joy to see your face. Thank you. Lovely, and thank you for this. Congratulations. It's very helpful. Only one question that I would like to raise is,
Sure.
what is your understanding about this principalities and powers? If I have missed your statement, anything which you did, because I also came a little delayed, the principalities and powers.
I think the principalities powers, the system.
I will finish it. I'll finish it.
Oh, okay.
As for me, I understand it has a great challenge to the empire, to the Roman Empire. I'm not taking it as merely as a kind of spiritual forces. It may be there, but my understanding is I have translated this Ephesians for Thiruvu William Bible, the interconfessional Tamil translation. There I have very much said that it is the political challenge. Please, could you please give me some. The challenge to the empire.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Sircar.
Yeah. You want me to speak, sir?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with you with this, because sometimes what we do that we sometimes very spiritualize all these things.
Thank you.
And I also 100% believe there was the actually political system of the day, because the Roman system that that we are talking about, that Paul was imprisoned in Rome, and therefore when he writes this, that he's the evil or the wickedness of the political system of the day. And so he was addressing those issues, and I agree with you that whatever you said, there may be a spiritual concern as well, but then I think that is the main issue that we are fighting. And even today also, it is not different. Today also we have to fight those political system today in our country. Even today, what is happening?
Thank you very
Isn't
much.
that?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah. In a nutshell, in a short, I think that is the
Lovely.
answer, and I agree with you fully.
So, any other questions? Please come up. Make use of the time. Professor M.J. Joseph, you have some comments or concerns? Please go ahead.
It is indeed a joy that you have spoken well on the Pauline epistles. But my question is this: how best we can interpret these epistles chronologically? When we speak about the progressive ideas in St. Paul, how do we account for the chronological development of his thinking?
Okay. Thank you, sir. And I also missed you actually. I know I didn't notice the name also. When I talked about that, I met you in Bangalore sometime and all, and so that we talked about the chronology or the context. I mean, when we divide the Pauline letters, with the beginning with the early letters, the First Thessalonians and Second Thessalonians and Galatians. Whether Galatians we take it as the first letter, and then followed by the Thessalonians, that is up to us. And then the major letters, that is the coming chronologically, the 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans, and then Then I talked about the next 3 prison letters chronologically, which came during the 60s, early 60s, when Paul was imprisoned in Rome. And then the last letters were the pastoral letters, those 3 letters, which is the pseudo, what is that, epistles, pseudepigraphic epistles. Now, chronologically, this development, particularly, definitely eschatology development was there, eschatological understanding, and even within the prison epistles, the Colossians and Ephesians have a different, so Ephesians has a delayed parousia, and Colossians, because Ephesians was written after Colossians, so following Colossians. And so Colossians is a imminent parousia, that is talking about, that's if we look at this in this way. This development is there, and also the other developments, the Christological or theological development definitely is there within the not only overall all the 13 letters, but also within the prison epistles, which we have seen. And I don't know how much I should say on this. Probably, sir, you can also talk about this. I mean, you can share something.
No, my question is this. Has he abandoned some of his earlier ideas when he moves from one letter to another letter?
Has he? I didn't get the...
Has he abandoned, given up?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is a very that is a very challenging question, whether he has given up when he was going from one stage to the another stage of the understanding of that. That is how, I mean, I think when he was writing his last letter, probably, I mean, I know that, I mean, I do not know that how you accept the pastoral letters. It is pseudo-epigraphic, or it is the actual Pauline writing and all. And Paul's mention of those ideas, theological or Christology, any ideas that whether he has abandoned the earlier one. I think to some extent, I would say that to some extent that he has abandoned, and then he developed the further those theological ideas, those concepts. For example, as we said that in the Colossian, where he mentions that imminent the parousia that is there, and then in Ephesians it is a delayed parousia. That means definitely he has abandoned this. I mean, he has come out of this concept, as well as even the church, even the church concept. In the Colossians, it is a local church. And then when you come to Ephesians, it is an universal church that he is talking about. All right. So that definitely there is a development, and that he has. It doesn't mean that he has 100%. He has done that. Maybe the local church understanding, local ecclesiology still it is there maybe in his mind. But then we see the development. And then Philippians, that where I just mentioned that he has mentioned overseers, the church structure, that though he has not elaborated it, and because of that reason that many scholars they think that it is a very developed idea, which is actually developed in the 2nd century, therefore some try to discard that Philippians as Pauline, genuine Pauline letter. And so those developments are there. And I think because of the development that we cannot simply discard that it is not Pauline or this is non-Pauline and Paul did not write, when I do not agree with that kind of things, of that the understanding. But then as you have asked the question that he has definitely has whatever he has spoken earlier, then he has definitely to some extent that he has abandoned.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I say one word?
Yes, sure.
That particular thing, abandonment, instead of abandonment, it is the development, which I would very much support. But that development, was it happening within an individual or within the community? Yeah, I would go for the community development. Development of understanding in the Pauline communities. Development of understanding in the Pauline communities will be a better thing. But thank you for using that word, development of thought. Thank you.
So friends, there are so many other questions and concerns I could see in the chat box, but it is unfortunate that we don't have enough time to pan deep into all those questions and give an elaboration. But we have had a very wonderful presentation this evening by Reverend Dr. Subhro Sekhar Sircar. He was discussing about he was trying to categorize them into personal and congregational epistles, and also he was giving us a larger framework of and then he was giving us an elaboration about what are the early letters, what are the late letters, and what are first letters.
We are not able to hear you.
So he was
Okay.
giving us the character connections and the various other theological connections, and also the linguistic connections and various other connections, and also several other features that we see individually within Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Nowadays, I am taking 20 lectures on these Prison Epistles, video lectures. In that way, I was also looking at these lectures with a lot of new ideas and a lot of new thoughts, especially while Dr. Jnanavaram was asking about the struggle with the powers and principalities. In some of the dictionaries, what I have seen is that the aspect of the believers in Ephesus lived in a culture where magical practices flourished. So that is one aspect, but the same text can be read from multifarious angles. That is the religious aspect, but there were religious, political aspects, and also there were cultural aspects, and also several other aspects would have prompted Paul to come up with these argumentations. That is what I believe. It is not a single aspect, several aspects would have prompted. In that way, Dr. Sircar was also telling the same thing. So thank you, Dr. Sircar, for your erudite presentation and lecture. May God bless you in the days to come so that you may be used by God in multifarious capacities. And I am going to give you some announcements. The assignment for next week is write in 300 words about Paul suffering as a prisoner based on the Prison Epistles and its implications in the contemporary realities of mission and ministry. Once again, write in 300 words about Paul suffering as a prisoner based on the Prison Epistles and its implications in the contemporary realities of mission and ministry. Our next lecture is on 1st of October. That is going to be the 17th lecture. That is all about the Thessalonian Epistles. The Thessalonian Epistles. The lecture is going to be delivered by Father Dr. Matthew, Father Dr. Reggie Matthew from Orthodox Theological Seminary. And let us wait for that. Thank you, Dr. Sircar, for your erudite presentation. May God bless you. Over to Billu.
Once again, we thank the presenter this evening, Dr. Subhro Sekhar, for the very erudite, scholarly, and very profound presentations. And we also thank the moderator, Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti, for in spite of the challenges that he faced due to network issue, he could very well manage to moderate the session. Thank you so much. And as Dr. Johnson had announced, see you all again on next week, Thursday, same time, 6 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you all.